4,200 hours. That's a long time. That engine's been putting in some overtime, so you're going to have to check up on a few things. Once you've arrived at this point, you can probably perform the 700-hour maintenance tasks in your sleep, and the 1,400-hour maintenance tasks have become routine. But since you'll have to do these tasks, plus the things in the 4,200-hour maintenance tasks, let's go back over them. You'll need to change the governor oil, clean the fuel strainers, and change the fuel filters. Check the engine coolant inhibitor concentration. Check the working order of the crankcase pressure detector. Change the lube oil filters. Clean the oil strainers. Check and clean the turbocharger oil filter and soakback filter check valves. Check and clean the soakback filter relief and bypass valves. Change the engine air filters. Clean the ejector tube. Clean the heat exchanger if the engine temperature is too high. And inspect the heat exchanger zinc anodes. Now let's go on to the 4,200-hour tasks. As you know, the oil is very important to your engine, so you're going to need to keep a close eye on it and change it when it loses its effectiveness. The best way to determine whether the oil needs changing is to take a sample of that oil and send it in for an analysis. There are oil analyzing laboratories all over the world, so send your sample to a reputable firm closest to your location. It should take a couple of days or a week at the most to get the results back. With those results, you should be able to determine whether the oil needs changing. If you check the oil and it needs changing before 4,200 hours, go ahead and change it. But remember, you have to change that oil at 4,200 hours if you haven't changed it before that time. The type of service, the type of oil, the quality of the filter elements, and the condition of the engine all play a role in how often that oil's going to need changing. You're the one that can tell when the oil needs changing, so you're the one responsible for keeping the oil in good shape. Whenever you change the lube oil, you're also going to need to change the lube oil filters, and clean the strainers, the strainer housing, the oil filter housing, and the oil pan, just like it's laid out in the 1,400-hour maintenance tasks. To change the oil, you first shut down the engine, then open up the drain valves and let the oil drain out from the oil strainer housing into the engine oil pan sump. Then take out the pipe plug from the oil drain valve and open up the valve to drain out the oil from the engine oil pan sump. You'll need some type of container to catch the oil it's draining out. Take out the oil filters. And clean out the housing. Now, take out the strainers and clean them up and rinse them off thoroughly. Then, wash off the strainer housing using fuel oil and after that, wipe off any extra fluid using a bound edge absorbent cloth. The reason we say a bound edge cloth is because if you have any loose threads hanging from the cloth, they could come off and get caught in the filtration system. Once you've cleaned up the strainer housing, go back over to the oil pan and clean it out. Put back the pipe plugs and close the drain valves. Put in new gaskets and seals on the strainers and filter housing. Now, put back the clean strainers and screen, and put in new oil filter elements. Then, fill the engine with new lube oil through this square filler opening in the strainer housing. One thing to be careful of here is to make sure the strainer housing internal drain valves are closed. Before starting up the engine, you need to give it a good once-over. After the engine's been started, let it idle for a little while until the oil is hot, and then check the oil level. If it's not at the full mark, add oil to bring it up to the full mark. As you remember, back at the 2800-hour tasks, you had to do some retorquing of a few bolts. Well, you're going to have to do the same thing here. First, let's torque down the basket to connecting rod bolts. These you'll need to torque to 190 foot-pounds. Then, the basket lower bolts need to be torqued to 75 foot-pounds. Now, torque the oil pan to crankcase bolts to 450 foot-pounds to prevent any leakage at the seal between the crankcase and oil pan case rails. You'll need to torque down the head frame to crankcase bolts. Here, the torque needs to be 30 foot-pounds if the bolts have a captive lock washer and a plain washer, or 40 foot-pounds if the bolts have a hardened washer only. That brings us to the cylinder head crab nuts. Before you can retorque these, you're going to have to loosen each one of them up about 1,000 foot-pounds, which is about 1 flat on the nut. You need to do this because of the wear at the cylinder head seat ring area. By loosening them up and then retorquing them, you'll make sure that you get a good seat and the right clamp load. Now that you've got all of the nuts loosened, go ahead and retorque each one of them back up to about 1,800 foot-pounds. The last thing that needs to be retorqued is the main lube oil pump nut. If you don't do this, you could lose the right clamp load, or you could lose the pump. It's easy to retorque the nut. Just take off the cover plate and retorque it to between 325 and 350 foot-pounds. After you've retorqued the nut, put on a new gasket. Put the cover plate back on and tighten down the cover retainer bolts. On to the engine cooling water pumps. You're going to have to take these off and check and clean them and replace them with qualified rebuilt pumps if they're damaged in any way. To take out these pumps, first you need to drain the engine coolant. Find a good clean container to drain the coolant into because you can reuse it. Now, take off the water pump inlet connection and the pump discharge flange connection. Then, take off the pump mounting bolts. And from there, you can take off the pump from the accessory housing. If you need to know how to work on the water pump, there's another show in the EMD series that deals strictly with the water pump. It's called Water Pump Overhaul. All the information about water pump maintenance and repair is in that show. Before putting the pump back into place, look at the pump discharge flange. There should be a plate attached to it which has a part number on it. Check this number against your parts book to make sure you've got the right pump. Whenever you're putting on a water pump, always be sure to use new gaskets at the pump mounting flange and the inlet and discharge connection. When you put the pump back on, torque down the mounting bolts to 65 foot-pounds and make sure the bolts at the inlet and discharge connections are tight. After it's put back in place and all the connections made, refill the cooling system and check for any coolant leaks around the gasket and seals. In the false bottom of the lube oil filter housing, there's a bypass valve. This lube oil filter bypass valve is there to circulate the lube oil just in case the oil is too cold to go through the oil filter or the oil filters are too dirty to allow the oil to pass through them. What happens is the oil comes in through the inlet and the valve is connected to that inlet by a passage. If the oil pressure gets up past 40 pounds per square inch, the valve will open and dump the oil into the filter discharge compartment. You're going to need to take the valve out and clean it and check it to make sure it's working all right. To do this, simply take off the blind plate between the inlet and outlet connections on the filter housing. Then take out the valve. When you take off this cover plate, you're going to get some leaking, So in order to get the least amount of leaking possible, you should always drain the filter housing first. And so you don't make too much of a mess, it'd be a good idea to put some sort of container under the cover plate to catch any of the oil that may spill out. Once you've got the valve out, you'll need to clean it and check it to make sure it's working right. Then, when you put it back in, you'll have to also put in a new gasket. The last thing to do is put the fasteners in place and tighten them down. The next thing you'll need to do is take care of the oil separator. It's kind of an elbow-shaped housing that has a wire mesh screen element in it, and it's mounted on the turbocharger housing. There's an ejector assembly that's mounted onto the separator cover that goes into the turbo exhaust stack. This thing works with air under pressure that comes through the ejector assembly and causes a suction that draws up the engine oil vapors through the screen element. There's also a suction on the oil vapors created in the ejector tube. All this oil vapor coming through the screen elements causes oil to collect on the element. That oil then drains back into the engine. What's left is gaseous vapor that goes into the exhaust stack and gets vented out into the atmosphere. Obviously, with all that oil being trapped by the screen element, it's going to need to be taken out and cleaned periodically, and 4,200 hours is the time to do that. You'll need to shut down the engine and take off the air line at the ejector. Take off the bolts from the separator cover and the bolts from the ejector assembly flexible connection, and then take off the separator cover and the ejector as an assembly. Once you've got that off, take out the screen element and wash it thoroughly. And then rinse it with hot water and blow it dry with compressed air. When the screen element is dry, put it back into place in the separator. Now, put the cover and the ejector tube assembly back on, and remember, when you do this, always use new gaskets. Then, tighten all the bolts down and reconnect the air line to the ejector. Now, you're going to need to check the aftercooler. What it does is cool the air coming into the engine, which makes the engine run more efficiently. The aftercooler is made up of tubes and fins. Water is circulated through the tubes, which cools the air as it passes through the fins. If the aftercooler has a water leak, you'll need to send it in for repairs. Don't try to work on it yourself. And if you need to remove or install your aftercooler, go back to your EMD engine manual. The steps on this procedure are laid out in Section 10 of your manual. What you'll need to do at 4,200 hours is check for any leakage and check the pressure differential to see if the unit is plugged. To check for leakage, look around the edges of the unit and look into the aftercooler air duct. If there's any leakage, you should be able to see it at these points. To get the pressure differential, you first shut down the engine. Then remove 2 of the cover mounting bolts and replace them with drill bolts fitted with hose stems. Then connect a U-tube manometer to the 2 drilled bolts. 2 things to be careful of here are, don't remove the hoses while the engine is at high speed, and don't put on or take off the hoses one at a time. Always put them on or remove them at the same time. If you don't, the high pressure in the aftercooler could force the water out of the manometer. When you've got the manometer hooked up, bring the engine up to full speed, with or without a load, and the pressure differential should be a maximum of 10 inches or 254 millimeters of water. Now we're down to the generator alignment. This is kind of a tricky piece of equipment, so you're going to have to be very careful to make sure it's lined up right. What we suggest here is that you refer back to your maintenance instructions that deal with the generator alignment, which is MI 1766. This will have the information you need to make that generator line up just right. Well, that's about it for the 4,200-hour maintenance tasks. As a matter of fact, that's it for all the maintenance tasks that you have to perform. Let's take a quick look back over all of the things you need to do in this maintenance task series and at the times you need to do them. First, let's start with the 700-hour tasks. You'll need to change the governor oil, clean the fuel strainers and change the fuel filters, check the engine coolant inhibitor concentration, and then check the working order of the crankcase pressure detector. Now on to the 1400-hour tasks. Change the lube oil filters, clean the oil strainers, check and clean the turbocharger oil filter and soakback filter check valves, check and clean the soakback filter relief and bypass valves, change the engine air filters, clean the ejector tube, clean the heat exchanger if the engine temperature is too hot, and finally, inspect the heat exchanger zinc anodes. At 2800 hours, you'll need to retorque the exhaust manifold to crankcase bolts, the turbocharger to air duct bolts, the aftercooler to air duct bolts, and the air duct to crankcase bolts. Then you'll need to check and clean the turbocharger exhaust inlet screen, check the overspeed trip setting, and then lubricate the governor synchronizing motor bearings and the governor linkage moving parts. The final maintenance tasks that you'll need to do are the 4200 hours, and they are: change the lube oil and lube oil filters, clean the oil strainers and strainer housing, the oil filter housing, and the oil pan, retorque the basket to connecting rod bolts, the basket lower bolts, the crankcase to oil pan bolts, the head frame to crankcase bolts, the cylinder head crab nuts, and the main lubricating oil pump shaft nut. Then, check and clean the water pumps. Check and clean the lubricating oil filter bypass. Clean the oil separator element. Check the aftercooler. And last, check the generator alignment.